I don't know if this belongs here, but I've always wanted to share this story, as it still keeps me up at night, sometimes thinking about an explanation for it. When I was in college, I worked at a sports bar/restaurant in Colorado. Before I was able to become a waitress, I had to be a hostess for a month. One Saturday, we got pretty busy because there was a local baseball game happening. I was seating people pretty frequently throughout the afternoon. Toward the end of the lunch rush, a couple came into the restaurant. I remember commenting on the woman's large turquoise necklace, telling her how pretty it was as I showed them to a table on the back patio, having some useless and polite conversation with them the whole time. I went and got them waters and brought them to the table, told them their server would be with them shortly, then returned to the host stand. About 5 minutes later, the same couple walked into the restaurant and towards the host stand. I was very confused and asked if they needed to be reseated. The lady looked at me seemingly just as confused as I was, and I noticed her large turquoise necklace again. The man said, "2, please," and I instinctively grabbed 2 menus and told them to follow me, thinking someone was playing a joke on me. I turned the corner to get a view out of the back patio where I sat the couple originally, and saw that the table was empty. Per the couple's request to sit outside again, I led them to the patio and noticed 2 waters and 2 menus sitting on the table already. I didn't know what to do, so I picked everything up and told them I would get them some new waters. I made my way to the bar to get waters, and the waitress from the back patio section came up and asked if I was okay. She said that 5 minutes earlier, she saw me walk to the back patio holding 2 menus, as if I was seating people, but there was nobody there. Then I came back with waters and put them down as if I was talking to people, but the seats were still empty. She said she was on her way to come check on me because her and other guests on the back porch were concerned about what I was doing talking to nobody. I asked if there were people there now, and she looked confused and said yes. So, from what I can gather, I saw, talked to, and sat these 2 people before they actually came into the restaurant. I have no explanation for this, and I'm wondering if anyone else has ever had an experience like this. This happened somewhere between the early mid-2000s. I was a kid, but old enough to remember a few things from that day. Backstory: every single Sunday for most of our childhood, my dad would take my sister and I to a local forest to let off some steam, and so that my mom could have a few hours to herself. We'd go from around 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and had a regular route that my dad, and even us kids, knew by heart. The day this happened, we parked in the car park and headed up the steep incline that leads to the forest as normal. You can either walk across the car park toward a short, flat trail around the pond, or head up into the proper forest, which is what we always chose to do. Once we were up the incline, my sister and I were free to run ahead as long as my dad could still see us, something I usually took advantage of apart from this day. As soon as we were in the trees, I noticed immediately that something felt off. I can't put it into words any more than that. All I knew in my kid brain was that the forest felt different, and I instinctively knew that I should stay close to my dad. I still walked ahead of him and my sister, but only by a few steps. The only way I can think to explain the feeling is wary, like when you have to go to bed on your own as a kid after watching a scary film. It wasn't flat-out terror, but I was jumpy and on alert. There was an atmosphere in those trees I hadn't felt before and haven't felt since. I can't remember much more of the walk, just that it felt different the entire way, but I definitely remember the end of it. Remember how I said there's a short trail around a pond? We'd hit our marker, and we're about to get onto the trail that leads back around to the car park, but the path wasn't there. My dad was almost spinning in circles trying to find this path he'd had no problem finding for years, and my feeling was confirmed. He turned to me and my sister and was explaining to us how weird it was that the path wasn't there. And then he turned to look again, and there it was. As soon as we saw that path and the pond and the people again, the funny feeling disappeared. We still talk about it to this day. Whenever my dad and I talk about weird stuff, we always mention how we have our own story. It always starts along the lines of, "Do you remember when the path disappeared at the park?" He didn't have the funny feeling I had until the path thing happened, and I told him about it later. But he did experience something himself while we walked that day. He remembers seeing a man in a red beanie ahead of us at one point, who suddenly vanished somewhere it wasn't possible to vanish like that. So yeah, that's my unexplainable story. It's not as exciting as most on here, but it's certainly a core memory for me and something that definitely kickstarted my interest in the unexplained. One day I was driving to meet my sister for lunch in a city in Northern Virginia, about an hour from my house. It was raining outside and I had pretty much no tread on my tires, but I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, I had to take an exit onto a busy highway. If you've ever driven in North Virginia, you'll know the traffic is absolutely terrible because of all the commuting people do from DC. As I was merging onto the highway, my car completely lost traction and I started spinning. I spun onto the highway, all the while just clutching my steering wheel and hoping for the best, as I had absolutely no control. I ended up stopping in the middle of the highway, facing the direction of oncoming traffic. Here's the weird part. When this happened, there was not a single car on either side of the road. Not a single car in sight. Without thinking, I drove my car straight, opposite direction of traffic, until I reached a patch of grass. I kid you not, the second my car was out of the way, cars were flying down the road again, hundreds of them. It was an extremely busy road once more. My sister even passed me, called me, and asked if it was me parked in the grass. I immediately started crying because I was suddenly overwhelmed with the severity of what had just happened. Had the traffic been what it normally was during my accident, I would have surely been hit head-on and most likely killed. I still cannot explain what happened to me to this day. It was like a glitch in the system. Obviously, it could have just been an extremely lucky coincidence. However, I drive this road quite frequently and have never ever seen this highway with not a single car in sight, and somehow there was nobody for the entire duration of my accident. If anyone has ever experienced anything similar, please let me know. Back in 2013, I was vacationing in the Smokies with my family. We decided to go to the Elkmont abandoned campground to explore. If you're not familiar, it's in the Appalachians and is an old campground in Elkmont that's been abandoned for years. After exploring a few of the abandoned houses, I decided to take a picture of the last house we were going to explore. I had taken a few other pictures with my iPhone already, and I'd never had any issues with my phone's camera for the 6 months I had owned it. As I was taking the picture, my phone screen started to glitch, and the screen became tiny vertical lines, the rainbow colors that old school TVs played while off air. I was with my cousin, and I showed it to her. We were both creeped out, and I felt that I shouldn't try taking any pictures again. I was also anxious that my phone was messed up, and I dreaded having to buy a new one. We got in the car, and when I checked my phone camera, it was fine, absolutely nothing wrong, and the glitch never happened again for the 2 years I had that cell phone. During the early stages of the pandemic, something happened that still kind of freaks me out even now. Full disclosure, I do have ADHD, and sometimes my brain is running around so much I lose track of time. Even then, that doesn't explain what happened. I was working from home during the lockdown, which did make keeping track of things a little easier without all the distractions from other people. Business calls filled my whole morning that day, and I was running around finding papers and making notes and whatnot. So busy, in fact, that I didn't even eat lunch that day. I remember looking out the window after one of my calls. It was bright and sunny out. The clock read 2 in the afternoon. I took another call a few minutes later. When I hung up that one, which did take a while, it wasn't just a 5-minute conversation, I looked at my clock again, wondering if I had time to grab a snack before my next call at 4:30, but my clock read 5 p.m., so the call went a lot later than I thought. If that were it wouldn't be anything to get alarmed about. What made me scratch my head and freak out was when I checked the length of the call on my phone. It said I was only on for half an hour, so it should have been what I thought it was, but it wasn't. Even the clock on my phone said 5, as well as the clock in my room and in my kitchen, so my phone was wrong, right? Well, I checked outside and the sun was low. This happened early spring, right when they started the lockdowns, so it got dark early where I'm at. When I turned around and started to try to figure out what had happened, I looked at the clock again, and the time now read 3 p.m. Same as my phone, same as the clock in my room and the one in the kitchen. They all went back to the right time. Even when I looked outside again, the sun was higher than where it had been the last time. It's like I went 2 hours into the future and then snapped back to regular time. The only thing that lets me know I just didn't make this all up was the length of the call on my phone. Otherwise, I would have just thought I misread the clocks or lost track of time like I sometimes do. Nothing like this has happened since, but it just makes me question what our world really is. Two weeks ago, I went shopping to get food at the local market. It's not that far from my house, about a 10-minute walk. I've walked this way hundreds of times, even at night, so I know it really well, and I never take a different route. I was about halfway there, just passing the old church in my neighborhood, when I noticed everything went silent. Not quiet, but silent. It felt like I was in a bubble or something, is the best way I can describe it. There was no sound at all, and just a few seconds before, I could hear the traffic from the main road 3 blocks over, and there had been birds chirping. That was all gone now. That wasn't the only thing that was off either. All the colors around me looked kind of washed out, more dull than they normally are, and they bled into each other. I almost thought I was having a stroke or something like that. I even smiled and then felt my face to see if one side was drooping. I was able to hold the smile, so I figured I was all right and kept walking. Next thing I know, I passed by a horse stable. There's no horse stable in my neighborhood. I live in a city. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned my head to get a better look, it wasn't there. There was a house in its place, and sound came back, and the colors were back to normal too. I swear I caught a faint smell of hay for a second afterwards, but that could have been my imagination. I kind of put it out of my mind after that. It was too much to think about. Well, yesterday, I went to a friend's wedding at the old church. Seriously, this place is old, but it's very beautiful inside. Anyways, they had pictures of the church throughout the years it had been standing. One caught my eye. The date under it was 1910, and it showed the church with a stable next to it and a horse yard. I almost pissed my pants because, even though I've been in that church before, I've never looked at those pictures. The stable in the picture was right where I had seen it 2 weeks before. Even if I had seen those pictures before, it doesn't explain the sound going away or the colors fading. It gives me the shivers just thinking about what this all means. This happened in high school, so about 10 years ago. My parents had just gone through a divorce, and I was in a really bad place. I had a few friends, but I was really pulling away from them. I spent a lot of time in my room listening to music and watching videos on the computer. I wasn't into drugs yet. That didn't come along until I went to college, but I would smoke cigarettes. Sometimes I would sneak out of my room at night and go down the path that ran by my house. This particular night, I was really down and took my bottle of meds with me with the intent to swallow the whole thing. It must have been around midnight, and I was sitting there bouncing the pill bottle in my hand while holding a smoke in the other. I was weighing my options, thinking about what it would be like to not have this pit in my stomach anymore or ever again. When I thought about going on, it felt overwhelming, but when I thought about the nothingness that awaited me on the other side, I was full of peace. I thought about how my parents would feel, how sad they would be, and it felt like justice to hurt them as much as they hurt me. Why should I live with the pain or what they did to me? They could live with my decisions instead. I got my bottle of water ready, took a deep breath, and unscrewed my med bottle. That's when I felt someone standing above me. I didn't see them at first, but I could feel their presence. In fact, it was weird that I didn't see their feet first. It wasn't until I looked all the way up that I saw their face, and then the rest of them appeared. Now, I will admit that I didn't get the best look at their face. There was a lamppost on the path, and he was standing in front of it. He felt familiar and friendly, and I could never not recognize the voice I heard as my own. The man was as tall as I am now. I was 16 at the time, and have only grown an inch since then. He told me, "Things get better. Keep going." And then he walked down the path until the darkness enveloped him. Here's the thing that gets me too. I couldn't clearly see his face because he was wearing a hoodie. The hoodie had the Apex Legends symbol on it, a game that is now my favorite, but wasn't even around back then. Oddly enough, I own the same hoodie nowadays. I feel like a future me, or me from another timeline, saved my life that night. I don't know, call it bullshit or whatever. All I know is that I'm still here today because of my doppelganger. I was chilling with a couple of friends over last week, and they all experienced this too. We watched a movie and then played some old school Ratchet and Clank on my PS3 for the memories. I only have 3 controllers, but we had 4 people, so we rotated around so everyone could have a turn. Keep in mind that none of my friends have a PS3 anymore. Nick was complaining that not all of us could play at once and it was ruining the vibe. Then Josh said, "What about that controller over there?" On my TV stand was sitting a 4th controller. At the time, I thought someone had bought one and brought it over, but why they didn't say anything until then, I didn't understand. We connected it and all 4 of us played for a few hours that night. The next day, I couldn't find the 4th controller again. I was back to my original 3. All my friends swear they didn't bring it with them or take it home. It wouldn't make sense for them not to leave it with me if they had bought one, since I know none of them own a PS3, and if they left it here, we could all play again some other time. It still makes me scratch my head thinking about it, but at least we had fun that night. I might have to run out and grab a 4th if we play again. They all remember us all playing together, so I know I'm not making this up. Chalk it up to a glitch in the Matrix, I guess. When I was in the Army about 6 years ago, 4 friends and I figured we'd go on a road trip during a 4-day weekend and see what we could get into. We didn't really have any plans. We just traveled east for 2 days and then 2 days back. We would stop and sightsee in any place that grabbed our attention, hang out in any town we liked, and pretty much had an adventure. We had been on the road for a day when we stopped to get some gas. Everyone got out and used the bathroom. It was my turn to drive, so I was in the driver's seat. Everyone got back in and I took off. We were driving my buddy's SUV, so there was plenty of room for all of us. I remember asking where everyone wanted to stop next, and I heard a voice I didn't recognize. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was a guy in the car I had never seen before. I freaked out and swerved on the road a bit, Then I asked, "Who are you?" The guy answered me like I was joking with him and said, "You know me, man," and then laughed. Everyone else kind of chuckled, but no one seemed to think it was odd that there was a fifth guy with us. So I figured this was some kind of weird joke. I'm pretty sure the guys in back would have noticed if a stranger had just gotten into the car with us. I played it cool, wondering when the punchline would come, or the big reveal that they were pranking me. It never happened, and for the next 3 days, I hung out with a complete stranger. He was actually a pretty cool guy, and I found out his name was Matt. We partied and took pictures together and had a pretty great time. He even had my back when a couple of guys in a bar gave me a hard time. He acted like he knew me and even knew my mom's name. She was having some health issues, and the 4 guys with me were close friends, so they all knew her name. Anyways, we get back to our base, and I expect to see Matt around, since he and the other 4 all talked about him working with us. I never did see him, and when I asked about him, no one knew who I was talking about. I pulled out my phone to show them pictures of us together, but he wasn't in any of them. I traveled and partied with this guy for 3 days. I even saw him talking to other guys in the group, so it's not like he was just my imaginary friend or something. No one had any clue who I was talking about, though, and I started to think I was either going crazy or there was some sort of shift in dimensions or something. I don't really know what to think, honestly. Kind of an odd thing happened to me recently. I had this old clock I got from my grandpa when I was a kid. It's cool, but I never use it, and it needs a bit of work. Pretty much it sits around and collects dust on my shelves. Took it to the pawn shop and got $100 for it. Would have been more if it was working, but it's still a collector's item at least. Anyways, when I get back home, it's still on my shelf. I got the bill of sales and cash for it. I don't know what's going on. A month ago, I was driving home late at night. I work swing shift, so it was around 1 in the morning. I'm on my feet all day as a janitor, so at the end of my shifts, I'm always tired. This night, I was really tired because I hadn't slept well the night before. The road was completely empty. I live in a pretty small town, so traffic, especially late at night, is non-existent. There was soft music on the radio. My heater was on because the night was pretty chilly. Needless to say, it was the perfect environment for me to start dozing off. I only had a couple more miles to go, and stupidly thought I could make it. At some point, I did doze off, and I woke up to bright lights and a loud horn from a car coming at me. I had fallen asleep and swerved into the oncoming lane, towards the only other vehicle on the road that night. I swerved back into my lane, but this is where it gets weird. I heard loud crashing metal and a scream when I swerved back, but obviously nothing had happened. The other car and myself had missed each other. I drove home and went straight to bed, too exhausted to even register how close that had been. I mean, I was shaken up by it, but my bed called to me and I answered. The next morning, everything seemed fine. My house was as it should be, and nothing was out of place. It wasn't until I got to my car that things got messed up. Nothing wrong with my car per se, but the seat was closer to the steering wheel than I have it. The radio wasn't tuned to the same station. I had trash in the back seat I never put there. Initially, I thought someone had borrowed it and brought it back. No one asked me to borrow it, and I never gave the keys to anyone. My doors were all locked that night, and no one broke in. Here's the big kicker. My girlfriend of 6 months came over a few nights later, and we ate dinner. She used her right hand to handle her fork. She was left-handed previously. That one right there had me shaking, because it wasn't little oddities anymore. She now does everything with her right hand. I asked her about it, and she acted like I was crazy. She said she's always been right-handed and to stop playing with her. I now feel like I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be. like I'm living someone else's life. There are other things that are different too, but I don't have time to list them all, and these are the biggest red flags. Did I die in another universe and jump to this one? What do I make of all this? I'm actually scared of what this means. About 2 years ago, I was house sitting for some friends while they were overseas on vacation. They have a really nice house, much bigger than mine, and with a pool and a hot tub in the back. The house was built in the late 80s during the Silicon Valley boom. I pretty much moved in while they were gone, so I spent a lot of time at the house and knew it well by the time this took place. This happened in the last couple of days I was there. It was my normal routine to wake up early and head over there to take a morning swim before work. This also gave me time to feed their dog and let him go potty too. So I was in the pool doing laps, and the dog was out in the yard. I then heard him barking his head off like crazy. It wasn't his usual playful bark when he saw a squirrel or something. It was ferocious and he was snarling. He's a German Shepherd, and when he means business, it's serious. I thought maybe somebody was snooping around the yard, so I went to go take a look. When I saw him, he was focused on the back kitchen window. He relaxed when he noticed me and ran towards me whining with his tail between his legs like he was scared. This surprised me because just a moment ago, he sounded like he was going to rip someone's head off. I went and looked around, but there was nothing near the window to set him off. That's when I noticed movement inside the kitchen. The blinds were down, so I couldn't really see what was in there, but I definitely saw something move. I went and grabbed my phone just in case I needed to call for help, and went in to see what was going on. I honestly was expecting a raccoon or some kind of animal had gotten into the house, so I wasn't too concerned. What I saw moving didn't look big or anything like that. As I got closer, I could hear someone talking in the kitchen, but it didn't sound like an adult's voice. There was humming, and I could hear a kid's voice singing. This kind of freaked me out. The neighborhood didn't have any kids in it that I knew of. I think there were a few teens, but no young children for sure. Now worried that some lost child had made their way into the house, I burst through the doors. Sure as hell, when I went in, I saw a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 in there playing with some toys on the floor. He had on a jean jacket, jeans, and his blonde hair was spiked. I noticed the kitchen looked different as well. The cabinets were in oak. There was tiling on the wall, and the floor was laminated instead of the wood that should have been there. I about fainted but caught myself and turned around to exit. Once back in the dining room, I caught my breath and tried to call the non-emergency police line to report a strange child in the house, but I didn't have any cell service. That was really weird because no matter where I went in the area, I always had cell service. I paced around outside the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do and get over the shock of what I had just seen. The whole time I could still hear the kid in there playing and singing. He didn't even seem to notice me when I went in, which I didn't really think about until later. Anyways, I finally decided I should go back in there and ask the boy who he was and if he was lost. So I went in a second time, but this time, everything was back to normal and the boy was gone. I checked my phone and I had cell service again. I called my work and told them I was sick, then grabbed the dog and went back to my house for the rest of the day, where I kept trying to tell myself I wasn't crazy. I didn't tell my friends what I had seen because they would have thought I was nuts. I'm not actually sure I didn't have some kind of psychotic episode or something myself. I've never experienced anything like that since. I don't do drugs and I'm a very moderate drinker. I don't know if it was a ghost or I went back in time or some kind of one-off hallucination. I mean, the dog obviously felt or knew something was wrong too, because he was barking and then he was afraid. What do I make of this?